Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started as it's 3 o'clock, so you can be respectful of your time. Welcome to Assessment Supports for 2020-2021 Grade 7 Reading Webinar. My name is Jill Nogueras, and I'm the Coordinator of English at the Virginia Department of Education. I am joined today by my colleagues in the Department of Learning and colleagues from the Office of Student Assessment. So on the line today, I have our middle school specialist, Colleen Cassida, our elementary English and reading specialist, Carmen Keurig, and then in the Office of Student Assessment, I have Lauren Zielinski, who will be facilitating this conversation, and she is joined by Catherine Ringley and Chris Tessera, who will also be monitoring the chat. So we're really excited that you could join us this afternoon. I know the weather is beautiful and you would much rather be outside, so I am thrilled that you decided to spend an hour with us today. Just a reminder in terms of communicating with us during this presentation, we are asking that you use the chat feature, and that does default to panelists only. So if from the drop-down menu, you could change that to all attendees, I think everyone on here would benefit from your questions and hearing the answers. So if you have any questions as we're going through anything, please use that feature, and we do have people who will monitor the chat and respond to you. So just to kind of give us some background and a little bit of foundation for what we're doing today, you all know that last year schools were closed by Governor Northam in March because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were in an emergency school closure that ended school for the last 10 weeks of our program. And during that time, very little new instruction actually was available to students as we kind of paused and supported our students and reviewed where they were. And this was to, ensure that everyone could have equitable access to that same material and instruction. There were high school courses that still continued on, but for the most part, we kind of took a pause. And as a result, we did lose 10 weeks of instruction, which we are still grappling with today and trying to figure out how to support students moving forward. But on June 9th, Governor Northam announced a phased reopening plan for Virginia schools. And to support that plan, Dr. Lane, our superintendent of public schools, shared the guidance document that was created at the Virginia Department of Education with a plethora of stakeholders called Recover, Redesign, and Restart 2020. So the biggest difference between last year and this year was that last year, the schools were actually shut down. And as a result, we did not have any assessments. And as you know, we were scheduled to begin assessing students on the 2017 English Standards of Learning with last spring's assessments. And because of the shutdown, this did not happen. However, we are in a phased reopening, no matter what that looks like for your specific division, whether you are in person, in some kind of virtual, in a hybrid model, wherever that may be, we are in new instruction now. So we are not closed, and we are moving forward with new instruction. And at this time, we anticipate that all students will take their reading SOL tests in the spring, and those will be aligned to the 2017 Standards of Learning. So in thinking about that document in the Recover, Redesign, Reopen document, there's a lot of talk about authentic learning experiences and what we can do for students to support authentic learning and what that might look like in terms of bridging skill gaps and enhancing critical thinking and increasing engagement, all things that feel like hurdles in this moment as we're trying to figure out what school looks like. So we wanted to align and show some practices and supports that you could use that could be completed in a variety of settings to support instruction and learning for students as they move forward with the 2017 standards after not having instruction for the last 10 weeks of school. So in thinking about this presentation and other supports that we have available here at the department, we wanted to start by just really looking at the 2017 Standards of Learning and the curriculum frameworks and the material that we have to support teaching and learning. And last year in the fall, we collaborated again with the Office of Student Assessment to interview schools in school divisions that saw gains and growth on the elementary, middle, and high school SOL reading assessments and kind of figure out, well, what are you doing? What's working for you? What do you recommend? Um, what best practices do you have in place? And we collected all of those responses and put together a webinar that we shared last fall, sharing with school divisions lessons learned from divisions on best instructional practices. So in keeping that practice, in place and thinking about those interviews and what we learned from there and what we know students need for instruction to kind of support them with these more rigorous standards, we've put together this material to support your instruction and student learning moving forward. But wanted to make sure that you knew that the link was here if you wanted to go back and check that out, because you will receive it with the PowerPoint presentation. Also want to take a moment and say that the assessment questions that are included in this presentation are not meant to mimic SOL test questions. Instead, they are intended to provide reading educators with insight into the 2017 English Standards of Learning. We all know that there are more rigorous concepts and skills that we're finding as we spiral up into middle and high school with the 2017 standards. And oftentimes we get the question, well, what does that look like when we ask a student about it? Or how do we give them a formative assessment or do a check into their learning to make sure that they're understanding? What does this look like? So what we've put together here is a variety of scaffolded questions that you could use, whether that be in small group or multiple choice or fill in the blank or in writing, formative, summative, however they could be used to really scaffold the skills that we have collected to exemplify and model with today to show you how that might work with your students. But just keep in mind that all of this that is here is really supposed to be supplemental information to support you with all of the other materials that we have in existence. And while we are picking out a couple of standards to demonstrate and model with, your instructional focus should remain on the standards as a whole and how to use authentic text to teach those standards as a whole. So while we have selected several standards to highlight because they are found in the authentic text in which we're modeling, we are just showing how you might ask questions that go along with those standards of learning, but not that you would use all of these questions in a lesson or in a formative assessment, or that you would only focus your instruction on these skills. Again, we don't just hone in and only ask students cause and effect questions all of the time. We are just trying to model what different cause and effect or main idea and summary, whatever the skill may be that we pull up for you today, how that might look in a scaffolded approach. Because again, we need to think about our students who missed 10 weeks of school last year and that grade level instruction that they missed, that we now need to figure out and determine where their holes are and how we're going to fold that into new instruction. So we're trying to give you a scaffolded approach to questions that go slightly below grade level, within the grade level, hitting the standard, and maybe ahead. Because while we had some students who definitely stopped learning 10 weeks early, we had many students who continued on independently and are ahead of their peers. And it is our responsibility to support every student that sits in our class. And then a couple of other reminders. We do want to always point you back to the Standards of Learning curriculum framework, because as you know, our skills spiral. The same skills that we are working on and teaching in kindergarten, first grade are still concepts that we're working on in 11th and 12th. It's just what we are asking students to do with those skills changes, and the text and the grade level and the rich, authentic language that you're finding in that text changes and gets far more complex and complicated as students get older. So it is really important that we not only teach what we are responsible for in our grade level, because the next year's teacher is certainly depending on that so that they can continue that spiral and have that loop get even wider. But at the same time, it's also important, especially this year, to look back and think about what pieces and gaps students may have, or what might be missing and lost instruction that we now need to kind of spiral back in for our students to feel successful. So we're going to go through a 4-step process here to kind of model how you might use this material to support learning in your division. And then we can point you to some additional best practices and resources to continue moving forward. Step 1 is going to be selecting that authentic text. And what I really want to highlight here is that we're talking about grade level appropriate text. And I realize that not everybody is reading at a 7th grade level when they're sitting in our 7th grade class. But when we are teaching the pieces that we are modeling with for solid instruction, we want to use grade level appropriate text that has grade level appropriate language and structures and everything in place to kind of support that rich understanding, because they have you as the teacher with them to scaffold and guide that for them. It may be that when our students are working independently or in small groups, they might be working on a different grade level text that more matches where they are. But when we're talking about whole group instruction and a teacher modeling, we definitely want to maintain that grade level text, because at the end of the year, the assessment that they take will remain based on a grade level text. Just want to say that because I know there's a little bit of confusion sometimes when it comes to computer adaptive testing, but our text will always remain grade level. So just kind of keeping that in mind. So we're going to talk about selecting authentic text, and then we're going to move into thinking about our content and the progression of our standards and what our students need to know and understand so that they can progress with that text and get all of the rich, authentic opportunities that that text provides to show their skills and to demonstrate their knowledge. Then we're going to look at those sample question starters that I talked about that can be used before, during, and after instruction. It's definitely going to show you how a skill progresses, and then how you might use those same question starters to turn these into writing opportunities, which we know that readers are good writers and writers are better readers. So we want to kind of put these things together. And then in thinking about these specific modeled skills that we'll walk through today, what instructional resources might be available to kind of support a continuation of that skill beyond the one model that we're showing you today. So that's kind of how our structure is going to be. And again, we are focusing on a specific set of skills that really aligned with the text that we're using today. So I just want to reiterate, we are by no means saying that we would only teach this SOL or these 3 SOLs with a text, or that we're advocating that that's what instruction looks like. We're really just trying to provide you with some question starters to show you and model how you might ask questions about different SOLs. And if you are interested in seeing any of the other grade level presentations, the skills that are modeled in each of those presentations are different because, again, it was based off of that rich, authentic text. So while this is the 7th grade presentation, you can go into any of the other grade levels to see how we model different question starters that have to do with different SOLs to kind of give you a more comprehensive global overview of what these question stems might look like. But now I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who is going to talk about selecting authentic text.
Thank you, Jill. And thank you everyone again for joining us this afternoon. We are so excited to share these 4 steps with you. And it is absolutely our desire that from these modeled steps with the specific text that we give you today, that it will also lay the groundwork for you to be able to take these steps and apply them in different pieces of authentic text and within your classroom based on your student needs. So with that in mind, let's jump right into step 1. And just like Jill laid out and set out a purpose for us for today, That is essentially where we need to start with our authentic text. Um, it is vital to know why you want to read this passage with your students. So really just taking the time to read the passage, to locate different examples of the different skills that are supported within that text, and then determining when is going to be the best time to truly use this text within the classroom. Have students identified for you different skills where they need those retaught and reviewed and brought forward again? Or is this a brand new set of skills that you've never taught before? Knowing what the purpose is and what you can do with that text is truly going to make sure that that learning is indeed authentic, and so that students can continue to be engaged not just with the comprehension of the passage, but being able to take those skills from passage to passage, just like we are hoping you'll be able to do with these steps once you're done listening to our presentation. So once you've sort of set that purpose and you know, I want to review new skills, I want to go ahead and just keep reinforcing these skills. Um, After that, you just really need to focus and determine if your reading comprehension skills that are found, um, did they align with where you need to go? And if they do, then you go ahead and present that text to the students, or you just find the appropriate time to scaffold it in. As Jill talked about, our skills are not meant to be a one and done in terms of teaching, or to just put a check in a checkbox that you have taught that skill, so it's time to move on. Instead, it's very much the idea of how can we continue to have discussions and bring out examples and apply these different skills within each of the authentic pieces of text that are being presented to the student. Make sure that those texts also support those guiding questions, provide that necessary background, so then student comprehension and engagement is there, and then they can also continue to apply the skills from piece to piece that they read within that classroom, whether it's independently or in group settings. So if you determine that perhaps a new passage is needed or it didn't fit the exact purpose, then look for the right text. Look for the right text that supports that authentic learning and the skills desired to continue to move forward with your students, because you don't want to force a skill into a passage. It needs to lend itself authentically, and to just really make sure that they are able to just understand and have everything always continued in, whether it's through discussion or the questions, have all of those skills continue to be reiterated and discussed. What we did throughout this presentation and in, we have two different texts that we are providing, a fiction and a nonfiction text. And we provided annotations to go along with those to help model where those skills really are, to help support the reading and to help support comprehension, and to really support that idea of how you can layer in the different pieces. You will see here that there's a screenshot of just a piece of the poem that is provided for everyone. And within that poem, you will see annotations over to the side, like you see here, where it explains, it gives background, it talks about different questions you could ask, and then how those questions could also springboard into further discussions. So even though I might start by asking a question about setting, I can then layer in, how did that figurative language give description of the setting, and how did, you know, this symbol help support that message from the speaker of the poem. You know, it provides those supports for you. And I do just want to note quickly that while you see at that top heading of the annotation that it says VITA program, these were indeed written by us. These annotations were written by us for you. And that VITA program is just sort of a placeholder of the program that we use to write. It's just part of our IT stuff. But please know that these annotations were specifically written for each piece to model how to incorporate authentic learning into these grade level authentic texts. So in 7th grade, as I noted, we selected 2 different texts. And the first one we selected was a poem called Birds. And we will provide for you the annotated Word document. So you have that support to use maybe with this passage or just how to apply in other passages. But as we were going through this poem, we noted that there were 3 different skills that especially stood out, that of point of view, the different genre characteristics, and tone. And as Jill noted, these are just 3 of the skills. And then through the annotations, we were able to talk about how the point of view led to the development of different, plot elements and things like that. So again, please know we are not advocating for skills in isolation, but indeed using them to help build off of each other so students can get that full picture of the 2017 standards and how to truly analyze that text. So what we're going to do next is really look at that content and progression of the standards. And our wonderful friend Colleen is going to walk us through those to see how this next step in the process works.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Lauren. Yes, so we're going to look at, based on those 3 skills that are rich examples in the text that we've provided, we're going to kind of go through that process for when you're looking at this new framework for the 2017 standards. Once you have selected your text and have determined the skills that the text lends itself to, this important step in the planning process is looking at the curriculum framework to see exactly what the essential knowledge, skills, and processes in the framework you want to highlight, and be sure students are going to have opportunities in the text to practice using that knowledge and those skills. Also, when looking at the framework, to really capture that progression and development of the skill, you're focusing on the text. Be sure to review the grade level before and the grade level after in order to allow access for all students. And that gets back to where we're looking at, we can fill some of those skill gaps, but also challenge our students who need it. So this process is key to noticing the difference between the standards at each grade level. So for instance, with our example here, in 7th grade, in that middle bullet, students should be able to differentiate between first and third person point of view. That's the standard. And the framework says that to be successful with that standard, 7th graders need to be able to identify and distinguish between first and third person point of view. So working on those 2 skills are how we get students up to that standard of differentiating between first and third person. But in order for students to be able to be successful with those skills and that standard in 7th grade, we can look back at 6th grade and see that students should be able to identify point of view and distinguish between first and third person, which if you notice in the 6th grade skills, identifying point of view and then being able to distinguish first and third person point of view are separated out as kind of 2 skills separately and explicitly. So this might be where some of your students still need support, and knowing that those students are still working to identify what point of view is in a text and what we look for in the text to figure that out, they can be working with scaffolded questions to help build that base, but always allowing for progression into the 7th grade skill. Because as we know, we're responsible for making sure that our students leave us with the best understanding of our grade level skills as possible. And similarly, for our students who already demonstrate understanding of the target skills for 7th grade, look at that next grade level progression to see where they will need to go in terms of analyzing point of view. And you see here, we go from differentiate to analyze how authors' development of characters, conflict, point of view, voice, and tone convey meaning. So point of view now becomes one of many elements to include when analyzing. And that standard is a new level of rigor. So the opportunities where we can provide students with questions that get them thinking about how the author develops these literary elements to convey meaning, we're setting students up for a success in the following grade with that next level of skill. And as we move up in grade levels and review the frameworks for the grades in which we fall between, be sure to look at the other standards and skills that go with the standard you're focusing on in 7th grade. You'll see here, this is an example of what I'm saying here. So 6.5G is identify the characteristics of a variety of genres. And we are looking at the characteristics at this point. So if we look at the 6th grade framework, that includes short stories, novels, and dramas. So we want to expose our students and make sure that they have had work with these 3 genres. But in 7th grade, we now are connecting elements and characteristics of a variety of genres. So as we discussed earlier, this is where we want to look at the framework to see what other skills within the essential knowledge, skills, and processes we need to incorporate to reach the standard goal of students recognizing the difference between, say, word choice and poetry versus how an author uses dialogue in a narrative. And that is a big jump from 6th grade. So we want to recognize if our students are struggling with understanding the characteristics of these genres and go back to the 6th grade framework and develop opportunities for students who need work with these types of fictional texts and practice with identifying characteristics more explicitly. And again, you want students working through grade level text with supports so that they are being exposed to grade level vocabulary and texts that highlight that rich example of the standards you're working on. And this is important because when you look at 8th grade here, 8.5F, so students now have to identify and analyze characteristics within a variety of genres. And what's interesting and important to keep in mind is that the 8th grade essential knowledge and skills states that to be successful with that overarching standard, students should be able to compare and contrast the characteristics of literary forms. And that's including the novel, short story, and then adds on biography and essays and speech, poetry and memoirs to name some, but it's not limited to that. And then they also have to use that base and foundation from 6th and 7th grade to be able to understand and analyze elements of an author's style in those texts, and to differentiate among points of view in stories, including first person, third person limited to a character or narrator, and third person. And then also being able to analyze how differences in point of view can create such effects as suspense or humor. So you see, like, the point of view skills start to support analysis of characteristics with genres, which is why we want to double check that we are incorporating activities that show students how to start synthesizing these standards and how they work together, which opens the door for that next grade level standards. So as 7th grade teachers, knowing that we are headed to that more rigorous level of analyzing characteristics of genre by 8th grade, you know that you can build in reflection questions or questions to think about that get at those connections, allowing students to write using support and explaining how an author uses these characteristics and how students came to their conclusion. So you're incorporating that reflective writing as well and being able to assess if your students are understanding how to use those skills. So you're planting the seeds for expansion on that standard. And this could be done through vertical conversations and planning by working with your peers in 6th and 8th grade to build that awareness. And then we get into this final example here of how to look back into the next level to support that continuum of the standards. So in 7th grade, so you see that students should be able to describe the impact of word choice, imagery, and literary devices. And that includes figurative language in an author's style. So to be successful with this standard, the framework says that students should be expected to analyze an author's choice and use of literary devices, which includes foreshadowing and irony, and analyze elements of an author's style, which is talking about word choice, how they structure sentences, use of imagery, contrasting points of view, and figurative language. So there's that spiraling piece that gets incorporated. So we're constantly building on that one skill to go backward and forward in the progression. So we've got that figurative language, but we also have those other components. So now in order for students to be successful and do these skills with a grade level text, a good place to start in evaluating what they know is using that sixth grade framework, where 6.5E describes how word choice and imagery contribute to the meaning of a text and the essential knowledge and skills that require students being able to notice an author's craft, including the use of language patterns, sentence variety, looking at vocabulary and imagery and figurative language, and then how authors use word choice to develop mood and tone. So we need to look at those skills that focus on recognizing and analyzing an author's use of figurative language. And this is a sixth grade component of the essential skills that is a necessary base for students to be successful in our grade in seventh grade with looking at that impact in an author's style. So these skills can be worked on through guided discussion questions that we're going to look at to figure out what background knowledge students are coming into seventh grade, and then build from there to allow practice and target those seventh grade skills. Just like our other two examples, while planning and allowing for students to work through and hone in on their grade level understanding, build in those questions and activities that allow students who are ready to begin working with the eighth grade standard and skill set, where we go from describing the impact to now we are analyzing the author's process of developing the narrative elements through and looking at voice and tone and how all of that is incorporated to convey a meaning for the reader. So this is really an essential step, and it's intended for you to consider where your students are and where you want them to be with regard to the target SOL, and what other standards and skills will support that understanding. So you really are examining and looking back and forward to the next step so that you can support students at all levels in progressing with the standard using grade level text again, and the framework, which is where you truly see that breakdown and spiral of the continuum.
So thinking in terms of our steps, we have determined our purpose, we have identified appropriate grade level text to support our desired purpose. So we have our authentic text. We have taken a journey through where our students are coming from, where we desire them to be, and where they could potentially be going, looking at the progression of the skills. And now we get to take step 3, where we put those, everything that we've learned by looking at the text and looking at the progression of the skills, and put it into action for student learning through these sample question starters. As Colleen pointed out, it is important to look back to then look at where we are and to look forward. And we did just that with these sample starters. If you look right away here, these sample starters are simply organized for you by SOL. However, the idea of them can absolutely be and should hopefully be integrated where you're doing lots of different skills at one time. And it is our desire that these sample starters could be used across grade levels. You could interchange different skills within them. And so please know that we are not advocating for skills in isolation through this organization of them. It's simply that, a means of organizing. And so if we look at this first question starter for 7.5D, it takes us back. Can our students define what first and third person point of view is? If they can, that's great. Then we can start getting into those questions that are more appropriate for the 7th grade rigor and what the curriculum framework is asking for from the students. And then we can continue to move them forward. As you notice in these starters, there's lots of room for personalization of these standards for what you're reading within your classroom and for what your student needs are. There's lots of areas for these question starters to be multiple choice, to be open-ended, to provide writing support as well. So as you're going through, you see, how would this story be different if told from? Then you go ahead and insert that character's name, so then you can determine how best to address that for the text being read. You can also see here at the very last bullet where we talked about how the students would explain the purpose of the story being told from a particular point of view. And again, drawing them back into the text to give specific details to support their answers. We always want to ensure that students are going back to the text, taking the information out so it is contextually accurate to support what it is that they're explaining or identifying. Looking at our next skill, you see the same sort of support through how these bulleted questions are listed for you. That first one kind of takes us back, so then we can start moving forward into the appropriate grade level. And again, changing out the information that needs to be changed for the text that you're reading. We are going to insert that specific title or the specific genre that you're working with. So then students are able to rise to the challenge to be able to answer these questions. And again, use them as springboards for further discussion to scaffold in other skills also. And again, there's opportunity for multiple choice, for open-ended, and for writing, which is so important to be able to do and to really show their understanding of the skills. And then looking at that last set of questions we have for you on this particular passage, again, we take you back. Let's define tone. Can you do that? If you can, great. Let's keep going forward. And then seeing those opportunities to really make these question starters support the text you're reading and where your students are at. And Jill had also mentioned this a little bit earlier in the presentation, that we do indeed have question starters, and we do have different examples of authentic text and this progression that Colleen walked us through for all the grade levels. So even though we might not talk about main idea today in 7th grade, jump into a different grade that did talk about main idea and use those sample starters and bring them to the correct rigor for your grade level. So then your students are still being supported and you have something to sort of help start the discussion. So please don't forget to go back to those other presentations for additional support for ways to really scaffold in that learning for students. And now that we've kind of worked through these different question starters, Colleen is going to take us to that next step of really how do we take this beyond just these couple passages we've provided for you, because this is so vital in instruction.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, so this step 4 is about exploring our instructional resources that will support your work on the skills and standards of focus. Once you have found texts that you like and have checked with your division resources to ensure alignment to the goal of your lesson, we really encourage you to look through our abundance of comprehensive instructional plans on our website. And the link is here on this page of the presentation, and you will have access to it after today. We are going to walk you, but you can go at any point onto our site and access these through our English instruction page. We are going to walk you through the page layout and highlight some lessons that might be useful to teaching the standards that we're talking about today. And this is just a snapshot again of the main page. And these lessons were developed by Virginia teachers and are here for you to use, whether you'd like to use a different text like we were talking about that aligns better with your division, or if you want some materials to go with that. Either way, you can use them how you'd like. So this next, they're categorized here by strand and then by grade band. I want to point out that while these lessons are listed for a particular set of grades, that doesn't mean they cannot be modified or adapted to fit the needs of a different grade level or a different set of students. So there are plenty of lessons that might not fall under the grade level you teach. So be sure when you're exploring, look through the skills that they cover, which is why they're labeled the way they are. So you can see what the actual skill and standard is that they're going to focus on. And then once you click on a lesson, the format will look like this. And you see that the primary or focus standard is listed first. Strand, I'm sorry. But because these lessons reflect best practice of integrating all the strands, the integrated strands are listed below the primary. And you'll then see the essential understanding is there along with the essential knowledge and skills. And that's coming straight from the framework. And these sections will help guide you in figuring out what students will need to know in order to complete the learning in the lesson, as well as the skills that students will need to demonstrate to show success with the strand and standard through the activities in the lesson. And then next you'll see that the primary SOL is listed because that is really the target standard of focus in the lesson. However, just like at the top there, the reinforced related standards are also listed so that you can see where there are opportunities in the lesson for reading and writing together and spiraling in when opportunities present themselves within the text. So that's what they'll look like. And then it'll go through the specifics like the teacher will, the student will after that. So this particular lesson that is linked here, it would support the standards that we're looking at in terms of analyzing tone. And you see the focus SOL is 7.5G. And I just want to reiterate that any of the resources here could fit within a unit or used as a support for students below, above, or on grade level. And you'll see our guided notes here that reinforce the idea that if you are reading through the text within this lesson and you see that it supports opportunity for spiraling of additional skills, by all means include those opportunities because we truly want our students to improve and grow and make those connections between these skills. This lesson can be found under the reading strand in the fiction section in the grade band 6 through 8. And the structure of this lesson, to just give you a little overview, it starts with the students thinking about everything they know about tone and activating their prior and background knowledge, and then takes the students through various activities using different texts and other media where they examine tone, and then it culminates with the writing component that allows students to demonstrate their understanding of an author's use of tone to convey a message. The lesson includes scaffolds and you can implement those for support or not, depending on how you want to use them. So we encourage you to use these lessons to provide extensions and scaffolds for the skills that you're working on and to help reinforce the spiraling of ELA skills. And then I think next we're going to pass it back over to Lauren, and we're going to look at a different authentic text for nonfiction.
Correct. We did want to provide the two examples, one for each fiction and one in nonfiction, as we know that these are both taught within the classroom and that they will, they're just important for students to be exposed to. So you will be provided with the annotated text for the biography Wheat for the World. And again, these annotations will provide support for different conversation topics, for ways to scaffold in the text. But we did find specific skills that identified with our purpose of determining the best ways for authentically incorporating the different SOL within this specific passage. Those skills were fact and opinion, viewpoint, and main idea. So again, we are absolutely going to have different guiding questions and sample questions that we'll get to in a moment to support these. But as you are in that text with the student, we really want to make sure that authentic learning is happening. And from the main idea, it'll maybe spring questions about summary or supporting details and how it truly helps to expand the text. And while this is a nonfiction piece, and no, we didn't focus on text features, there is absolutely still teachable moments where you could bring in different questions about that, or bring in different questions, about other skills. So please just remember that these were the skills that supported our purpose that we set for this authentic text to support the authentic learning for this nonfiction passage. And I think, Colleen, you're going to walk us through some more progression of standards because you're amazing at this.
Well, thank you. Okay, so we want to point out here too that on the blueprint at each grade level in the overall blueprint of the standards, that provides us with that top level of a standard. And so you see here, they're all the same at that level. However, in order to reach this level at each grade, we have to use the curriculum framework to see what those standards mean by skill set. For instance, so right, like we just said, 6th through 8th grade, there is a standard that says differentiate between fact and opinion. So going by the blueprint, we know we need to cover this standard at each grade level. But in 7th grade, if you look at the essential knowledge and skills, again, that requires students to analyze how different authors write about the same topic and shape their presentations or viewpoints of key information using facts, opinions, and reasoning in order. And so that's what students need to be able to do and understand in terms of fact and opinion at 7th grade. Then in 8th grade, there is that additional component to fact and opinion where they need to distinguish between subjective and objective writing. So without having worked in previous grade levels with texts that have fact and opinion and looking at those other skills that support this standard, students won't be able to be successful at understanding the difference between what they're being expected to do at higher grade levels. So the blueprint is kind of like the 500-foot view, and the framework is like rolling up your sleeves and doing the day-to-day work that's going to get our students to be able to reach that. And here we have another example to build that foundation of what students do after learning how to draw conclusions and make inferences. In 6th grade, the skills require students to make inferences and draw conclusions using the text for support. So that provides the base for what our 7th graders need to do, where they use the inference skills to analyze how different authors write about the same topic and shape their presentations or viewpoints of key information using fact and opinion. So you'll notice that fact and opinion also starts to come together and support that higher level of skills, because when we see this 8th grade standard, there are several aspects to work on to reach this top level of the standard, such as recognize and identify an author's use of connotations and persuasive language to convey a viewpoint, determine an author's point of view or purpose and text, and be able to analyze how the author acknowledges and responds to conflicting evidence or viewpoints. So we have to be sure that we are using this framework as a map to get our students to be ready to make inferences and connect those pieces for deeper analysis. That is, as we know, going to get more rigorous as we go through the grade level, but being able to use our previous grade levels to support and make sure that we do have the foundation of what is needed to be successful. And then finally, we have one more example, and I really like this example to talk about this because, main idea, looking at what this means in the progression is very different. So for instance, in grade 6, our framework requires that students use strategies and rules for summarizing, such as find and create a main idea statement, right? But when they get to us in 7th grade, to be successful in identifying main idea, students have to be able to determine the central ideas in texts and analyze that development over the course of the text. So this is all gearing up to prepare for that 8th grade step where the main idea standard is transferred into the skills of analyzing multiple accounts of the same event or topic, noting important similarities and differences in that point of view that they represent, and then analyzing how 2 or more texts with conflicting information on the same topic and identifying how those texts disagree. So as you see there, the progression of identifying main idea becomes way more complex in terms of what skills students are working with at each grade level. So again, it's that's where we use the blueprint to make sure that we're hitting those top standards, but we're digging into that framework to help determine what exactly we have to get our students to be able to work with in texts and utilize those skills that overlap. And I think we're going to pass it back over, yep, to Lauren for step 3.
Yes. And this again is very similar in nature to what we talked about with the poem for our authentic text for 7th grade. Again, we're going to take our students back and simply define the terms of fact and opinion. When our students show mastery there, then we'll begin to move them forward and align them to the rigor of the standard and potentially continue to move them forward so they are prepared and exposed to the skill for 8th grade. And just like we did with the poem for the sample starters, we also put a writing opportunity at the end of each one of these, that last bullet. And again, all of these question starters are very much there and meant to be personalized to the specific text you're reading, to the student need, and to ensure that maybe even possibly, instead of saying, which one of these is a fact and opinion, which statement supports what the author is trying to talk about. I mean, there's lots of different ways to take these starters and then tweak them for a different skill. And that was done very intentionally to ensure that the resources that were being provided for you in this grade level or any that you may happen to jump into were really versatile and able to support that authentic learning for your students. And we followed this same model for the next skill that Colleen had just talked us through and through the text that has support for it. And we can see that again, with that next skill, again, we took them back to determine where they were, to then bring them forward and bring them where they need to be. And again, ending with a potential writing opportunity. And even though the writing opportunity is the only one that specifically calls out, use specific details from the text to support your answer, that is very important to do, whether it's a multiple choice question, an open-ended, or writing. You always want the students to go back to the text to support their answers. So always keep that in mind too, even though it's not explicitly stated in each one of these question starters. And then for that last skill, again, of main idea, we have you go back to the very simple to define, to then bring them forward. We presented you with opportunities to ask this, talking about a main idea of just a particular section, or the main idea of an entire part of the text. As we know that sometimes students need to sort of build their confidences and do it in smaller chunks of information so they can then apply the skill in a larger setting. And so we tried to help support that as well, and to really provide scaffolding to have students being asked the appropriate questions to match the rigor of the SOL. And again, ending with that writing opportunity and remembering to keep in mind that though that is the only one that states to use specific details, always ask your students for those details to really make sure that they are comprehending the text, that they are comprehending this skill, and that they're able to apply it. So we hope that these starters are some really great resources for you. And again, don't forget to go back into other grade levels as well and make them and tweak them appropriate to your needs for your grade level. And then Colleen has a couple more examples of taking this information and applying it beyond these two texts that we gave you in this presentation.
Yeah, so this main idea nonfiction, that is in the grade level band for 6 through 8 on our comprehensive literacy instructional plans. And this lesson really does provide extended activities using texts that are relatable and on grade level. But again, if you have a text that you prefer, look through the activities in which this lesson guides students through finding the main idea of a text. And not only could the lesson provide support for students who need to work with that identification piece, but there are extension activities where students select an environmental issue where they research about it to take a digital, some sort of digital platform and condense the main idea to where every word counts. So you have to get that main idea when thinking about what to put on the end product. So some of the reinforced SOLs that are covered in this lesson can support that spiral on summarizing because that goes very, very much hand in hand with main idea. And how there's also opportunity for how we preview a text and how to write a clear topic sentence for focus on main idea. So check that out and use it to the best of what you would like it to be. And I'm going to turn it over to Jill to share some resources and where to locate them on our site.
Thank you, ladies. I've been following along the chat a little bit, and I've seen a lot of requests for our resources, and thankfully they're all in this presentation for you. We do realize that working in two separate offices with two separate web pages on a greater website means that things can be a little tricky to find. So we have put direct links in this presentation to all of the specific materials to kind of help you find pieces and sort through what you need. So what you see here at the top is the Virginia Department of Education English page. That's where you will find that's kind of our landing page where you will get into the standards, the frameworks. It has links to resources and then links over to assessment and everything else. So that's a bit of a landing page. And then you can see that we have each of the new blueprints here. These are the new blueprints, the blueprints that align with the 2017 standards of learning. And those are each here. And I'm hoping that one of your takeaways today is that while that blueprint does cover the main standard, you really need to look in that curriculum framework to get into the details of what that might look like in terms of showing that a student has mastered and can demonstrate a skill. So please, 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 if there's one takeaway, is that you understand that we need to dig a little deeper than just reading the top line information on the blueprint. After that, we have for you the reading progression charts. These are the orange ones. If you're using the blue, they're from 2010 and they no longer work because we are 100% moved over to the 2017 standards of learning for the spring 2021 testing schedule. So please make sure you can check those. We have communication, reading, writing, grammar, and research available there to kind of support you. We also have the curriculum framework and the standards posted for you. And then we have some information about computer adaptive testing. I did see a couple of questions come up about that and want to make sure that we point you in the direction of all these links that might help you kind of sift through and answer some of your questions. So there is a page that is dedicated to computer adaptive testing. We have a document here that shows you a comparison between a passage-based CAT test and a traditional linear test. So if you've been teaching for a while, you remember the old style of test, but now that middle school has moved over to passage-based CAT, this will walk you through the changes. We have the link to this assessment supports webinar series page. If you go to the overview presentation that we had on October 1st, that is where you will see a couple of slides in there that tell you which standards were pulled out for each of the grade level presentations to give you an idea of where you might find some of those question starters to kind of support you in your instruction of different standards of learning skills. And then that recover, redesign, restart document that we talked about briefly at the very beginning. We have an FAQ about passage-based CAT testing that's there for you. We also have a link to the practice items that can be found in TestNav 8. TestNav 8 is the computer program that your students have on whatever devices they take the test on, and it allows students to practice with items that are aligned to the 2017 standards, but really points out and helps the students navigate how TestNav 8 works and shows them how to use the tools and how to highlight and cross things out so that they aren't confused or don't find things complicated on test day. So it does offer a few practice items, but really going through that functionality really helps build and boost that student's confidence so that that is not the barrier to demonstrating their reading comprehension on test day. Also, because the 2017 standards have, oh my goodness, been around for 3 years now at this point. That's kind of crazy. We do have 2 years worth of institute presentations where we went around the state and worked with teachers all over the place to present instructional best practices that were aligned to the 2017 standards. So if you go and look at either of those links, you will find elementary, middle, and high school presentations to kind of provide additional support for you. We have a link to the comprehensive literacy English instructional plans. And then that last link, probably one of the most important, is the most recent Superintendent's Memo 249-20 that updates you on the fact that the new standards of learning tests for reading will be starting in spring of 2021. So that is when we will officially make the switch from assessing on the 2010 standards of learning over to 2017. So that will be a direct link there. And again, this is our contact information. We are happy to help you. That's why we are here. So please feel free to reach out, send your questions, call us, whatever you need to do. We're happy to support you. Again, we will do this again tomorrow for 8th grade, same setup, same structure, because what we are really demonstrating is the different supports and questions and progression of skills within each of the grade levels. So if you're interested, please come back and see us again. If you're busy, you know the structure now, so you'll be able to look at the materials and understand what we were talking about. And again, all of the recordings will be posted and put on our YouTube page as well. And then we'll finish out the week with end of course on Thursday. So I just want to take a moment to thank you all for sticking it out with us. We're thrilled that you could be here, and we hope to get these materials to you as soon as possible. Thank you for your time. Have a good afternoon.